At 11:47 p.m., a cleaning woman accessed a payroll terminal on the 31st floor of one of the most secure tech companies in Atlanta. No authorization, no permission. She inserted a USB, copied something, and walked away like nothing happened. The system didn't flag it. But one man saw everything. Ethan Kessler, Billionaire CEO, had stayed late that night, reviewing internal reports, watching his company through the security feeds like a hawk. What he saw wasn't just a breach, it was personal. The woman's name was Mira Alvarez. She worked night shifts through a third-party contractor, never spoke unless spoken to, kept her head down, always gone before sunrise. But tonight she slipped into the accounting office. Calm, precise, and when she thought no one was watching, she plugged in a USB. Ethan's heart didn't race, his hands didn't shake. He just leaned forward, quiet, focused, the same way he did when closing 9-figure deals. He watched her leave the room, walk toward the elevators, then disappear out of frame. That was the moment the thought crossed his mind. I've seen this before. Late-night access, small slips, innocent faces hiding inconvenient truths. He'd lost millions to betrayal from people who smiled at him in the morning and stole from him at night. He picked up his phone. His thumb hovered over the internal line for security. But instead of pressing it, he switched tabs, pulled up her building access logs, cross-referenced dates, checked door entries, camera footage, delivery manifests, and something didn't add up. Tuesday night, she lingered near the IT room. Wednesday, 12 minutes in the printer bay. Friday, elevator access to a floor she wasn't assigned to. Nothing dramatic, nothing that screamed guilty. But together they formed a pattern. One he couldn't ignore. He checked her file. Mira Alvarez. Age 32. Single mother, employed through Janelle Clean Co., no prior incidents, no complaints, no social media, no criminal record. A ghost in the system, but not invisible enough. He leaned back, eyes on the screen where her last movements played on loop. This wasn't random, she knew what she was doing, and she wasn't stealing trash bags or toilet paper. He closed the window. Didn't call security, didn't say a word to anyone, because if there was something going on, he wanted to see it himself. Tomorrow night, when she left work, he would follow her. Not out of revenge, but because something about her didn't make sense. The next evening, the city moved as it always did. Traffic lights blinking through cold air, buses groaning under the weight of workers heading home, the sound of a city running on invisible routines. But not for Ethan Kessler. Tonight, he wasn't reviewing reports or balancing investor portfolios. He was sitting behind the wheel of a low-profile sedan 2 blocks from his own building, watching the entrance through a reflection in the side mirror. She came out exactly at 11:12 p.m. Mira Alvarez. Same uniform, same backpack. Her steps were quick, not rushed. She didn't look over her shoulder. Didn't notice the dark car parked near the curb. She headed straight for the bus stop. Ethan followed from a safe distance, 3 car lengths back. No headlights, no obvious turns. He knew how to shadow someone. He'd done it once before, years ago, when a partner was embezzling funds behind his back. That story ended in court. But this felt different. He wasn't looking to expose a criminal. He was trying to understand a person. The bus rolled into view and hissed to a stop. Mira stepped on board with a tap of her transit card. From the glow of the windows, Ethan could see her shoulders sag slightly as she took a seat near the back, next to the window. He tailed the bus through southeast Atlanta, a part of the city he hadn't driven through in years. Broken sidewalks, grocery stores with bars on the windows, apartment buildings with laundry hanging from balconies in the winter air. She got off near Jefferson Avenue, a quieter stretch lined with old warehouses. Ethan parked at a corner, kept the engine running. Mira walked with purpose now, holding the backpack close, her breath visible in the cold. She stopped in front of a building with a faded sign above the door, Eastside Community Exchange. The entrance was lit by a single, flickering bulb. Ethan stepped out of the car and crossed the street. He didn't get too close, just enough to see through the front windows, framed by peeling paint and dusty glass. Inside, the space was modest. Mismatched chairs, folding tables, walls lined with posters in English and Spanish. About a dozen women sat in a loose circle, notebooks in hand, and at the front of the room, Mira. She set her bag down, smiled, picked up a dry erase marker, and turned to the board. "Tonight," she said clearly, we're going to practice how to answer a job interview question. Tell me about yourself. Ethan froze. This wasn't a side hustle. This wasn't a scam. She was teaching. In clear, gentle English, repeating phrases slowly, Mira guided her students through mock questions, corrected pronunciation, encouraged them without judgment. One woman stammered her words. Mira kneeled beside her, whispering the line again. Another asked for help filling out a form. Mira brought out a stack of printed applications from her backpack, the same one that carried the USB last night. Ethan leaned against the wall outside, hidden in the shadow of a boarded-up storefront. He stayed there for nearly an hour, unmoving, watching the scene inside unfold with quiet disbelief. She wasn't stealing, she was equipping. She wasn't extracting value, she was building futures. At the end of class, Mira unpacked a box of granola bars and fruit, set them on a table without fanfare. The women lined up, smiling, saying thank you in both languages. She offered a carton of milk to one woman's child and wiped down the tables herself when everyone left. And all the while, she didn't check her phone, didn't look at herself in the mirror. She simply moved from one act of service to the next, as if this were as natural as breathing, as if no one had ever thanked her properly before. Ethan stepped back from the window. He felt something shift. Not in her, but in him. The narrative he had written in his mind no longer fit the person in front of him, and the data, for once, didn't matter. Because in the quiet of that drafty, underfunded classroom, he'd just seen something that algorithms couldn't explain. Purpose. The next morning, Ethan Kessler sat alone in the corner of his private executive lounge, staring at a tablet he wasn't reading. Behind him, the city moved in predictable lines, traffic patterns, investment returns, staff memos. His entire world ran on systems, on certainties, and yet his thoughts refused to align. He had watched her for nearly an hour. Not just Mira, but the women she taught. The young mother balancing a toddler on one knee while repeating job interview lines. The older woman who needed help filling out a digital form. The teenager too afraid to speak, until Mira crouched beside her with a quiet, "You're doing fine, just try again." None of them would show up in any company dashboard. Not on a resume. Not in the boardroom discussions Ethan had sat through for the last 2 decades. They weren't marketable. But last night, he'd seen something more valuable than market trends. Human investment. Mira hadn't been hoarding secrets. She had been building futures, quietly after midnight, without pay, without recognition. Using a backpack and a printer from his supply room. He took a sip of coffee. Cold again, he barely noticed. His assistant, Drew, walked by the glass door and paused. "Want me to prep the meeting room, sir?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah, thanks." But he didn't move. Instead, he opened Mira's file again, the internal version from the custodial contractor. Basic profile, no anomalies, until now. He opened another browser tab and searched public records. Mira Lucia Alvarez, born 1991, Tucson, Arizona, community college, information systems major, 2 semesters, dropped out. Single mother, 1 child, Emma Alvarez, age 6. Nothing criminal, no lawsuits, no online presence to speak of. It wasn't a red flag, it was a ghost profile, and somehow that unsettled him more. He scrolled again, paused. A hospital bill, publicly recorded due to collections court filings. From 5 years ago, over $18,000, pediatric care, no insurance. That explained the dropout, the job trail, the overnight shifts. She wasn't hiding something, she was surviving something, and no one had noticed. Until now. That evening, Ethan returned to the same street. Not to follow, just to understand. The lights were on again inside the Eastside Community Exchange. This time he didn't linger across the street. He walked closer, careful not to be seen. From a side window he watched Mira unpack her bag, pull out papers, a whiteboard marker. Her daughter sat quietly near the back, coloring a picture of what looked like a house. Tonight's topic, filling out online job applications. Ethan watched as she walked through the steps, screenshot by screenshot, showing the women how to upload a resume, how to write a cover letter that wouldn't be flagged by bots. Then came the questions. How do I answer when they ask why I don't have experience? Mira replied without hesitation, "Tell them what you have done. You've raised 3 children. You've managed a household budget. You've translated every school letter. You've worked double shifts. Those are skills." Another woman spoke up, "But they only want people with degrees." Mira smiled, gently. Then we show them what a degree can't teach. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. Not discomfort. Recognition. He had been that employer. The one who filtered out resumes with gaps. Who assumed quiet meant incapable. Who built an empire on algorithms, but forgot that behind every form was a human life. He stepped back from the window. He didn't need more proof. He had seen enough. The following morning, Ethan stood in the hallway outside his office, watching the city blur behind tempered glass. His phone buzzed with meeting reminders, flagged emails, shareholder questions. He didn't touch it. Behind him, the glass door to the executive boardroom opened. His assistant leaned out. "They're ready for you, sir." Ethan didn't answer right away. Then, calmly, "Start without me." He walked back to his desk. Not out of indecision, but because he had a different meeting to attend, with himself. He pulled up the company's access logs from the night before. Mira had left at 11:08 p.m. No anomalies, no unusual activity, no trace of the life she lived after she passed through those revolving doors. He clicked over to her internal contractor file again. Name, hours, custodial route, and then he did something he hadn't done in over 5 years. He opened her resume. What he saw stunned him. Bachelor of Science in Information Systems, incomplete. Advanced proficiency in data modeling, fluent in Spanish and English. 2 years of systems work at a tech startup that folded during the 2008 recession. She wasn't underqualified. She had simply disappeared from the formal economy, like thousands of others, once she couldn't afford to stay visible. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on the desk, eyes locked on the screen. His own company, the one built on inclusion, innovation, and transformational values, had reduced Mira Alvarez to a mop and a badge scan. Not because she failed, but because the system didn't know how to recognize her anymore. And somehow, neither had he. That night he stayed later than usual, not because he had to, but because he wanted to see her, not from behind a screen, not from a distance, but in person. At 10:55 p.m., he heard the quiet rumble of the cleaning cart approaching from the hallway. He stepped out of his office. Mira froze, halfway through adjusting the mop handle. "Mr. Kessler," she said quickly. "I didn't know anyone was still." "You used to work in tech," Ethan interrupted. His tone was calm, not accusatory. She blinked, startled. "Yes, a long time ago." "You studied data systems." "I did." He paused. "So why are you here?" Mira looked down at the cart. Her hands gripped the edges tighter. "Because that degree doesn't pay hospital bills," she said, voice low. "Because when my daughter got sick, I lost everything else. Because this was the only job that would hire someone with a 6-year employment gap and no time for interviews." Ethan didn't speak. Not right away. He'd asked the question to confront her. But her answer had confronted him. Mira straightened. "I can leave if I'm making anyone uncomfortable." "You're not." She met his eyes, unsure what to make of that. "Good night, Mr. Kessler." "Good night, Mira." She turned and disappeared down the corridor. But something had changed. For the first time, Ethan didn't just see her as someone in the building. He saw her as someone belonging in it. Ethan didn't usually leave his office during Mira's shift. But this time, he did. A week had passed since their brief exchange in the hallway, the one where she told him, plainly and without apology, that her daughter's hospital bills had ended the life she once dreamed of. It hadn't left his mind. And tonight, while reviewing vendor contracts, he noticed a surplus inventory order for external hard drives, 6 models newer than what the IT team actually needed. His mind didn't jump to budget concerns. It went somewhere else entirely. Back to that community center. Back to Mira, handing out sample resumes printed in grayscale because toner was expensive. At 10:40 p.m., he walked the long corridor to the ground floor, clipboard in hand. A pretense. Just enough to keep his staff from asking questions. Mira was mopping near the rear stairwell, her hair pulled back, earbuds in. One earbud hung loose, always, so she could listen for Emma's voice if needed. Ethan had noticed it before. He noticed it again now. He didn't want to startle her, so he waited until she turned and saw him. She paused, stood straight. "Evening, Mr. Kessler." "I'm not here to check on your work," he said gently. "I came to ask you something." Mira's expression didn't shift, but her body grew still. "I've seen the work you're doing off the clock. At Eastside," Ethan continued. "I watched from outside. You were teaching job applications, system navigation, resume formatting. None of that is part of your job here. She took a breath, quiet but steady. No, it's not. Why do it? Mira wiped her hand on a towel tucked in her belt, then looked up at him fully. Because no one ever taught me, she said, and by the time I figured it out, I'd already lost the chance to use it for myself. There was no bitterness in her voice, just fact. And I'm trying to make sure they don't lose theirs. Ethan felt something tighten inside him. He'd spent most of his life designing systems, platforms, networks, hierarchies. He built things people depended on. But somehow, Mira had built a room full of people who depended on her. Without code, without salary, without credit, just conviction. I want to help, he said. Mira looked confused, not suspicious, just cautious. You don't owe me anything, she replied. And I'm not asking for favors. I'm not offering a favor, he said. I'm offering infrastructure, resources, equipment you shouldn't have to beg or borrow to keep teaching. She hesitated. I'd need full autonomy, she said. Ethan didn't flinch. You'd have it. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was the sound of two different lives brushing up against each other. Not colliding, but beginning to understand. Then softly, Mira added, whatever this becomes, the center can't become a charity project. These women don't need saving. They need access. Ethan nodded. That line stayed with him long after she walked away. The next Monday, Ethan did something he hadn't done in over a decade. He took the long way through the East Side district. No tinted windows, no driver, just him. In the same street where Mira had led a workshop the night he watched from behind a cracked window, unseen. The tech he sent her, 10 high-end laptops, refurbished but spotless, had been signed for and logged. But no thank you note came. No email, only a short message through the security gate. These won't go to waste. That's all I can promise. And it wasn't bitterness, it was clarity. That morning, he pulled into a cracked asphalt lot beside the center, dressed down in a plain navy sweater and jeans, trying not to look like what he was. A billionaire stepping into a space built by necessity, not capital. Inside, the center smelled of coffee and whiteboard ink. Kids laughed down a hallway, and in the main room, 3 women practiced typing job descriptions. One struggled with the tab key. Across the room, Mira crouched beside a girl no older than 12, helping her with a code snippet on the screen. Why does it keep saying syntax error? The girl asked, frustrated. Because you're missing a bracket. Happens to everyone. Even the guy who built Facebook. Seriously? Mira nodded. Especially him. The girl laughed. Mira's voice had no teacher's authority, no patronizing patience. It was honest, practical, warm. Ethan stood near the door and watched. He didn't announce himself, he just watched. In that moment it struck him. Mira wasn't teaching despite her pain. She was teaching through it. Each sentence she gave those girls, each quiet correction, was forged from the life she never got to finish. She was handing it forward, piece by piece, to strangers who didn't yet know how much they'd need it. And no one applauded. No one knew. For a man whose name was on skyscrapers, apps, campuses, it was humbling. And then came the twist. Later that evening, as Ethan prepared to leave, Mira approached him near the sidewalk. She wasn't smiling. Her tone was calm, but direct. You need to stop watching me like I'm some experiment. He blinked, caught off guard. I'm not a case study. I'm not a redemption arc. I'm not here to fix your guilt. Ethan opened his mouth, but she held up a hand. I appreciate the laptops, really. But if you're only here because it makes you feel less, whatever it is you feel, don't stay. Her words weren't cruel. They were clean, stripped of ego. She wasn't impressed by power. She wasn't afraid of it either. Ethan let the silence stretch. Then he said quietly, that's not why I'm here. Then why are you? And for the first time, he didn't know how to answer with strategy or spin. He just said, because the way you show up for people, it's something I forgot was possible. Mira didn't respond right away, but something in her gaze softened. Not approval, not forgiveness, but the acknowledgement of truth. She nodded once and turned to go back inside. 2 days after his quiet visit to the East Side Center, Ethan was summoned. The board meeting wasn't on the calendar. That in itself was the message. He arrived at the glass-paneled conference room atop Kessler Tech Tower, his own building, his name on the wall, and yet the room felt like it belonged to someone else today. 12 men and women sat around the oval table, faces tight with intent. Ava Sinclair, his COO, stood at the head instead of her usual seat beside him. That shift in position meant only one thing: confrontation. "Ethan," she said plainly.